The Astrax Dominion Elite Institute always felt alive, but the spindle, the Academy's gravity testing hall, felt like something that dreamed in metal. The chamber rose 7 tiers upward, spiraling around a central gravity column that pulsed with violet light. Every vibration, every hum of the turbines beneath the grated floor, reminded students that this room controlled the building's artificial gravity and could break bones as easily as it stabilized them. Cadets crowded the lower levels, gathering for Instructor Dravos Krell's mid-cycle gravity endurance drill. Species from nearly 20 systems filled the central platform: scaled reptilians, deep-pressure aquatic bipeds, stone-bodied miners, and light-shelled flight casts. They stood in precise arrangement, armor locked, gravity clamps magnetized to their boots. The human wing sat far above them in a narrow observation row assigned to fragile gravity species, as Academy policies politely phrased it. Most humans slouched with practiced indifference, trying not to meet anyone's eyes. Only one girl sat upright, centered on the bench, hands resting loosely on her knees. Kaia Ward. 17. Silent. Unpredictably calm. She looked as though she was waiting for a tranquil lecture, not an extreme gravity demonstration renowned for sending entire cohorts to med bay. Instructor Dravos strutted into the circle below, his heavy virulent exoskeletal plates clicking as he walked. The hall's lights reflected sharply off the ridges lining his jaw, designed by evolution to handle pressures that crushed starship hulls. He tapped a console embedded in his gauntlet. The gravity column brightened and the floor shuddered. "Today," Dravos announced, his voice magnified, "we test resilience. Not excuses. Not soft-world fragility. Resilience." His gaze swept deliberately toward the human section. A few cadets smirked. Others whispered openly. Kaia didn't shift. Didn't blink. Her stillness irritated them. Stillness always did. Gravity began to rise. Only a little, 3G, barely a warm-up for most species below. Even so, one human exhaled sharply, sliding down the bench to brace himself. Another leaned forward, fingers white against the rail. Kaia remained steady, spine aligned, breath controlled. Dravos tilted his head, amused. Observation row struggling already? Disappointing. The Kralaxian student nearest the gravity column, a wiry creature with spiked joints, plucked a small bolt from his tool clip. He flicked it upward toward the humans. The grav barrier stopped it, suspending the object in midair like a frozen star. "Your air doesn't even trust you," he said, clicking his mandibles. No one responded. Humans were taught to ignore bait. Kaia didn't even look at him. Dravos paced back toward the console. "We continue." Gravity rose to 4G. The metal beams along the floor groaned softly. Alien cadets straightened their posture to show off their tolerance. Some cracked their knuckles. A few adjusted their breathing regulators. The humans tightened their grips on the rail. Kaia's boots stayed flat, her expression unreadable. Ferocian Cadet Rulon lifted his head toward the humans. His voice carried easily, sharp and metallic. "Perhaps they should watch from the infirmary. Safer there." A few laughed. Dravos didn't intervene. Kaia finally moved, only to shift her legs slightly, folding them neatly beneath her. She looked like someone settling in for a quiet performance rather than enduring rising orbital pressure. That composure created a subtle ripple of annoyance across the lower platform. Mockery loses its flavor when the target doesn't flinch. Then the hall lights trembled, followed by a brief flicker of the displays lining the gravity column. Belther Oren, the Oren 5 gravity technician monitoring the controls from a high platform, leaned over his screen. His bioluminescent skin pulsed nervously. He tapped his comm instructor. "The core feedback loop is registering an unexpected variance." Dravos didn't turn. "We continue." "Sir, the variance is building. It happens every drill cycle." Belther hesitated. He rarely disagreed with instructors publicly, but he adjusted the calibration feed anyway. The turbulence settled for a moment before rising again, this time sharper, like a held breath ready to snap. The students didn't notice. They were too fixated on the silent girl who refused to respond, as though gravity was a polite suggestion rather than a crushing force creeping toward dangerous levels. Dravos smirked at her tranquility. Interesting. The quiet one sits while others struggle to breathe. Someone from the Ferox row muttered, "I'd like to see her try standing in a real cohort." Kaia stood. She didn't stand abruptly, or defiantly. She just rose and took 3 unhurried steps down the aisle. Her movement was precise, almost liquid, unaffected by the pressure increasing around her. Humans rarely volunteered for anything involving extreme gravity exposure, but she descended the spiral walkway until she emerged onto the lower platform, into their space. A low murmur spread across the hall. Dravos raised a brow ridge. "Cadet Ward. Humans are restricted to the observation row for their safety." Kaia spoke for the first time, her voice steady. "I request placement in today's cohort." Silence rolled across the platform. Even the gravity column's pulse seemed to pause. Dravos let out a slow chuckle. "Request? You misunderstand your position, human." "I understand it," she replied. "I also understand gravity drills scale by discipline, not species." The boldness wasn't loud, wasn't rebellious. It sounded factual. Unemotional. Disarming. And that made Dravos angrier than any shouted challenge. "Fine," he said, gesturing to a circular marker near the gravity column. "Sit in the primary slot. Let the cohort witness Earth's courage." The Kralaxian snickered. "Courage is overrated." Kaia crossed to the circle. Gravity increased incrementally with each step, bending the air like thickening glass. She lowered herself and sat exactly in the center, legs folded, back aligned, hands on her knees, an image of absolute calm in a hostile environment. The technician's voice cracked over the comm again. "Instructor, the core is registering a spike. You need to reduce. Continue the drill." Dravos barked. Belther cursed under his breath but obeyed. The gravity column pulsed brighter, shadows bending across the floor. Several cadets braced themselves. Even Dravos adjusted his stance. Kaia closed her eyes. For a moment, the hall was still. Then the gravity climbed to 5G. The edges of the platform groaned. Armor creaked. Breath regulators hissed in compensation. A few lighter species leaned heavily on their stabilizers. Kaia remained completely motionless, her breathing soft and even. Dravos paced around her, searching for strain on her face. He found none. "Is Earth this dull?" he muttered. "Or are you simply unaware of the pressure you sit in?" Kaia opened her eyes slowly. Not wide, just enough to show she was listening. "Pressure introduces truth," she said. "That's why I'm here." The instructor scowled. Belther's voice broke the tension. "Warning, gravity core instability rising. Something is amplifying the feedback signature, origin point centered on." The technician stopped. His sensors highlighted the seated girl. Dravos squinted at Belther's feed, then at Kaia. Kaia exhaled once, barely a shift in the air. The floor trembled. The chapter ends just as the gravity field swelled, reality tightening around her presence, a silent question hanging heavy between every heartbeat in the hall. What exactly is this quiet human girl? Gravity did not drop on the spindle, it piled, layer over layer, like intention gaining weight. By the time the drill reached 6G, the circular platform looked less like a training arena and more like a proving ground for survival math. The air was visibly dense now, light refracting around the gravity column's violet pulse. Students who once mocked humans as an aesthetic inconvenience were now silently regretting their seat assignments. A Ferocian torso hummed under suit pressure. An Oranthian cadet's respiration sacs fluttered too quickly. Deep-pressure species who prided themselves on static calm were blinking first. Kaia Ward, however, breathed like someone who had always lived inside equations written by catastrophe. Standing was trivial to her. Remaining unaffected was the spectacle they didn't expect. The gravity tech Belther knelt before the grav column console, frantically locking manual safeties. His fingers danced across glyph keys that glowed orange under stress. "Instructor, we must throttle it down," Belther snapped through comms, voice crackling at the edges. Dravos Krell, boots anchored by reinforced clamps, stood above the console pit, arms folded, irritation coiling beneath his plates. "The drill has tolerances. We are inside them. We were inside them. The core is responding like it's arguing with another physics signature." Kaia heard that. The others heard only the argument, not the meaning's direction. A Kralaxian cadet, Sirlik Voss, same bolt-flick student from Chapter 1, attempted a spine shift, micro-adjustment for exoskeletal relief. Even his tiniest movement triggered a local gravity hiss through his armor. He cursed under his breath. "Quiet girl," Sirlik muttered louder, hoping to scrape reaction from her stillness. "Does it still feel like courage?" Kaia didn't look at him. She looked toward the core, understanding not choreography. "It feels like responsibility," she replied. That answer disarmed him mid-taunt. It wasn't emotion. It was valuation. Gravity rose to 6.7 g. The floor plates audibly popped beneath their boots like suppressed thunder. Cadet Rulon Threx of Ferox 8, who once suggested infirmary relocation, now leaned on a kinetic stabilizer rod. The rod was meant to stand him steady. It started to bow instead. "Belther, readings?" Rulon asked aloud, not mocking, simply needing data. Belther flicked a holographic overlay above the cadet circle. It cascaded unstable gravity signatures like shimmering waterfalls of probability. Cohort composite coefficient surging. External anomalies slamming into stabilizer handshake protocols. Dravos glared upward. "Don't project guesses. Project truths." Belther pinched the bridge of his face, exhaling hot frustration. "Truth, the origin feedback spike is symmetrically centered on the primary circle seat." Kaia was sitting there, but she was not the source, in their minds. Anecdotal misunderstanding is heavier than truth when prejudice calibrates perception lenses. A Neptulon cadet, heavy blue aquatic Titan-grade physiology, staggered slightly. He was built for ocean core pressures of 5 kilometers, but artificial gravity layered unpredictably? That was a different beast entirely. He kneeled, hand webs splaying across the floor, armor squealing under temporal physics mismatch. Kaia stood, slow enough that every species gaze caught her movement like a radar ping. Dravos finally turned, eyes narrowing. "Primary slot is not a viewing seat, cadet." Kaia replied, cool as an unrolled star chart. "Then calibrate the barrier to my presence instead of viewing my species." A few cadets blinked. Dravos's plates clicked once, a physical punctuation of disdain. "You're still human." Kaia met his gaze evenly, the longest eye contact beat she ever gave anyone. "I'm calibrated to collapse coefficients. Not your narrative ranking." That line made Rulon cough, not from words but because his armor tried to compensate for 7G and failed him kinetically. Words create identity injury when biology knows it should have been signal for species re-evaluation sooner. The gravity column pulsed brighter, violet glare reflecting off sweat-beaded foreheads and stuttering breath regulators. Even Dominion training armor meant to handle 9G was starting to groan under misaligned predictive physics segmentation. Dravos stepped into the command line. "All cadets, magnetic clamps at full bleed." The aquatic titan's clamps overloaded instantly, snapping a coil inside his boot. A micro-explosion of magnetics shot sparks across the floor. "Clamps overloaded," someone yelled. Kaia simply displaced her feet, shifting her stance slightly to avoid the sparks. That microstep made the sparks curve around her like data avoiding anomaly peak. Belther stopped typing and just stared at the grav feedback overlay. The chart was now screaming the truth, but disbelief layered across choir retinas makes physics read like arrogance until institute structure creaks audibly. "Instructor," Belther whispered, awe creeping into his disciplined voice, "she is not bending gravity. Gravity is bending the room around her regulatory absorption vectors." Dravos snapped, irritated, Nobody asked for poetry, tech. Kaia interjected, no theatrics, poetry states the condition. Math breaks the floor beneath us. As if gravity heard cue, the spindle's plates groaned loudly, then the first cracks spidered outward like rings around a dropped stone in dense water, but these were crack rings created by competing physics protocols beyond cumulative gravity drill segmentation nonsense. Students from observation tiers were now descending despite 7G, sprinting down the spiral stairs, medics, monitors, Dominion nanite repair squads. They were not coming to mock humans, they were coming because core integrity outranked humiliation hierarchy now. Kaia walked calmly, boots flat, toward the grav maintenance pit, stepping over collapsed Kralaxian armor shells and trembling rods. Dravos finally noticed the floor telemetry pointed inward to Kaia's sacral kinetic gravshock absorption nexus, not gravity turbines. Cadet Ward, Dravos demanded through comm, voice raw now, do you feel the pressure? Kaia looked at her hands, then at the cracking core sphere glowing beneath the hull as personnel shields trembled. She spoke quietly, but this time quietly carried authority, not fragility. I don't feel pressure like weight. I feel it like timers before thresholds. The core will fail soon. That matters more than my seating posture. There it was. A species statement, not brag but calibration truth. Dravos froze. Not because he respected her words yet. Because her gravity web had already started to handshake with reactor couplers interfering catastrophic field overlap. The gravity column's next pulse did not rise. It splintered, jagged, uneven, arguing with Kaia's absorption vectors, creating a localized reversal pressure outward like gravitational-shock ripple memory. Kaia stepped into the pit edge, eyes locked onto the core sphere that glowed too bright. Medics yelled instructions. Dominion nanite squads enacted repairs. But Kaia did one thing no species ever did in that hall. She reached out silently, not physically touching the core, and emitted a tiny kinetic shock redistribution stabilizer field from her spine, not violent, not forceful, but morally precise. A stabilizer field built to absorb blowback, not create it. Focus on the core, not me, she whispered. The chamber shook loudly enough now that disbelief was finally cracking. Medics yelled, evacuate. Kaia didn't move toward exits. She moved toward answers. Because physics had chosen its representative. Then the core shuddered again. But this time, students weren't asking how to mock her. They were asking how she stayed unaffected without stabilization rods at 7G. The real tension slope had flipped direction. Not can humans endure gravity? But who calibrated gravity to endure her? And below the roaring turbines, the core sphere pulsed once more, too bright, too unstable, but now for a new reason. The room was rewriting its disbelief. The first grav-surge quake had peeled the sheen off the academy. Now the room looked medic-swept, bulkheads latticed with glowing emergency filaments. The gravity column was no longer a reactor, it was a debate, hissing telemetry faster than any comm array could translate. Shifting gravity snapped between 7G, 0G, 11.3G, then back to 5.9G in a cadence that made seasoned species seasick without water. The casualties were quiet not by discipline but by compression. Blue-blooded Kralaxians lay like emptied shells, exotails slack. Oranthians huddled against support rails, armor whining at microfracture seams. Dominion medics scrambled, auto-dropping inertial blankets that pinned students long enough for stretcher drones from the medevac bay to claim them. Kaia Ward moved through it like someone walking inside an eye of a storm that did not know it was a storm. At the control dais, Commander Valda Rook from Astrax Security Command had jurisdictional override on every shield in the chamber. He slammed a fist across a manual lock plate. Institute nanites swarmed like silver fog, spiral-locking cracks along support beams. Belther, the gravity tech, sat cradling a cracked sensor wafer, his earlier calculations looping in error cascade spirals. This hardware would record a core fault, but it also told an ugly truth. Biology taught force static grav tolerance didn't prepare anyone for a field that oscillated with a competitor presence it never anticipated. A Ferox 9 cadet, armor venting coolant mist, rasped, Turn it off before it eats the spines. Belther shook his head. It isn't on a switch any longer. It's on a signature. We stabilize her absorption web, the core stabilizes itself around a new default. That, or we ride the collapse to vacuum breach. Commander Rook's gaze snapped to him. You speak as if the reactor ranks her. It does, Kaia said, already walking forward. Every head turned. Not because she raised her voice, because she never had to repeat it to be heard, not now. Panspecies responses to artificial gravity normally flowed through armor clamps, boot magnetics, and pressure equalization rigs. Kaia's rigging was her own spine and the braided shock redistribution lattice under her skin. The room didn't register boots responding, it registered her center mass nexus humming back, the way Earth's seismic crust hummed back at predators that had no instinctive reason to fear it until the moment it swallowed them whole. Kaia reached the secondary grav pit where the reactor sphere lay half buried under spider-radiant cracks. Voltage bloom glared upward like broken stars through ice fracture lines. Monitor drones from the Dominion Oversight Collective had descended the spiral ramps, but gravity now pressed unevenly, making even low-tier human hallways at the Institute feel like monarch butterflies trying to pin down hurricanes trained by solar winds. Dravos Krell staggered into view. He had always performed dominance. Now armor plates on his legs drooped like hinged gates failing under pressure-weight mismatch. Ward. Dravos spat, voice clipped to hide strain. You leave the line during discipline? Kaia crouched, not bowed. Crouched to see the core clearly. I left because the line was cosmetic, she said. Shields are arithmetic. Reactor bleed is resonance. Your show is noise. The sphere is signal. Dravos bristled. You claim primacy? I claim load redistribution, she replied. Which buys us 14 seconds before the reactor walks us into structural disassembly. That was the first time anyone measured survival in seconds that didn't belong to fear narrative but troubleshooting logic loops made audible when quietly stated by what they assumed was soft gravity cadet furniture. Dravos lunged a step forward, grimacing when gravity spiked to 8.1 g mid-motion. He froze, boot magnetics screaming at overload. Across the room, Cadet Serlik Voss tried to stand, felt his boot coil short, and collapsed backward into a grav pocket that yanked him down like a lead-lined coffin remembering ocean depths that drown arrogance quietly. Kaia didn't look at him. She looked at the core sphere. Belther grabbed his comm again. Ward, vector bleed signature crossing thresholds. We need you not to escalate kinetic signature or shields fail quadrant ally. Kaia finally took a breath, and whispered into the comm with a comm that carried like climate not apology. Rook. Unlock the pit lattice shielding across Sector 12. Commander Rook blinked. No cadet ever ordered him alone. He keyed the lock. I don't take orders from. Kaia lifted a hand. One short sentence. Take them from collapse math. He hesitated 0.4 seconds too long. Kaia stepped forward silently and placed her palm near, not on, the cracked gravity sphere, letting kinesic absorption filaments unspool like wavefront probability halos, not violence escalation sequences. Nothing happened. Until it happened. A gentle pulse expanded outward from Kaia's center mass lattice. It didn't push back the gravity. It swallowed its backlash. Armor bolts across the room snapped inward as her shock sink field engaged. Loose spindle hardware, screws, rivets, dropped wrenches, floated upward then stopped, quivering in suspension around her like satellites unsure of orbit. Cadets gasped. Belther cursed. Commander Rook just stared. The gravity sphere throbbed in unstable violet, then finally registered a handshake protocol with her field, not the boots, not the armor, not the arrays, but the one signature seated quietly where others assumed physics asked politely not to define her yet. Alarm klaxons fired late, like metaphors catching up to mathematics. The grav floor cracked further but no shards rose. Kaia's field absorbed the fracture kinetics like a tuning fork that refused to propagate shattering hope through the structure but remembered the correct gravity of collapse coefficient rank sooner. Dravos struggled to speak. What are you doing? Kaia didn't glare. She calculated aloud for the cohort, for medics, for the commander, and for every species retina that once mistook endurance for silence absence. Balancing your arrogance to reality ratio, she said, by retiring the feedback impedance your intimidation created and letting the reactor understand the difference between viewing weakness and testing it. The beasts of shifting gravity coefficients had always been studied as a metaphor for prejudice, but Kaia was no metaphor. She was a field regulator apparently written against overwhelming asymmetry magnitude, not Boots rhetoric but gravity recalculation nexus. Core integrity, Belther whispered to himself, reading her field metrics spike cascades on the overlay. She doesn't spike. She drinks spikes and reports the difference upstream. Kaia took another step. Floor plating creaked beneath her but redrew itself without splinter, as if trying to mimic the calm it finally recognized. Commander Rook keyed universal shields back online along support beams, blinked sweat sage from his brow, and muttered 6 words he never imagined would be policy justified. Institute recalibrate gravity around Ward. The room obeyed not by romance but by consequence chain. Kaia walked toward the stairs, not sprinting, not limping, not pausing. Structural gravity failed students earlier because it did gatherings centered on Boots and are igging instead of center mass lattice anomaly not named Boots. She ascended the spiral ramp alone, leaving a chamber where blood-cooled arrogance had turned to quiet awe not by speeches but by singular unseen calibrations cascade. Behind her, the gravity sphere pulsed once more, stabilizing, ever slightly, like a machine finally choosing its seat. The silent girl didn't change on provocation. The room changed its gravity's opinion of provocation. They moved her trial without ceremony. When combat alarms, med drones, and instructor shouts tangled the spindle like bright noise, her transfer papers were already signed. Kaia Ward was reassigned to Dominion-wide reactor calibration cohort, station 5 levels below the original human tier. No observation row. No spectators. Just the central reactor again, rehoused in a clean, reinforced containment pit. New shields wrapped the engineering confluence wing, locking every beam, bulkhead, and stair in place against further oscillation. The Dominion hid embarrassment inside protocol. The hall held its breath inside repair mode. Kaia stood at the pit's edge while Commander Valda Rook from Astrax Security Command hovered over reassembly nodes. Nanite swarms crawled over the fractured cores housing like silver insects reweaving a wound. Dravos Krell lingered several steps behind, plates dulled, posture stiff not from pressure but recalculation. I asked for endurance, Dravos muttered. Not collapse. Belther Oren, the gravity technician, shook his head. He had begged for throttling early but now moved faster than pride could interfere. No, you asked for a demonstration you already believed answered. That's why the sphere answered back. Kaia heard the column cycling down for cooldown. No active drill. No intentional danger input. Still, the air felt wrong, not heavy, not volatile. Wrong, like the memory of a formula violated by assumption, not data. Chief Medic Valthera June of Dominion Health Council entered the chamber with rapid authority strides. Medevac blue sigils glowed along her coat seams. Rank tides existed until evidence restructured them. She kneeled by a collapsed Oranthian cadet as stretcher drones zipped past. Kaia knelt beside a Ferocian student whose breathing rig sputtered. A Dominion Oversight Collective repair drone hovered too close, its toolkit cluster rattling audibly. Without hesitation, Kaia slid her hand into the cluster's path, not grabbing tools, just interpolating vectors so shaken hardware drifted around a new center of stability. The drone recalibrated its hovering algorithms instantly. Belther's console registered it before his words ever formed. Significant signature spike, controlled absorption mode. Medic Valthera turned. Ward, step back from the cascade feedback. You've stabilized enough. Kaia sat anyway, not rude, not dramatic. Data compliance was her behavioral north. I stabilize until the sphere is quiet enough to stop confusing logistics for humiliation. Commander Rook rubbed his temples, stress sweat glinting. The sphere will stabilize faster without anomaly bleed into feedback channels. Her eyes remained on the core sphere's cracked pulsing heart just visible under lattice plating. The mercury white of Institute xenon lights reflected off her pupils like calm ice remembering something predatorial under it. She spoke 6 words at med-field whisper volume. Then let it learn me by endurance. Rulon Threx, Ferox 8 physics medalist, staggered down the spiral entry ramps with arm splints and dented plates. Nanite repair paste still glimmered along his forearms. He had regained consciousness just to watch. Curiosity outranked pain in the better species. He grinned weakly. So you don't break in 7G, he said. Fancy gene mod? Kaia shook her head. Just a short negative, almost gentle. No another pause to let misunderstanding trap itself. 7G breaks people taught to break. Earth taught me to walk through collapse fields, not theatrics. Dravos scoffed. Oh? Engineers made you a gravity ghost? Medic Valthera snapped the first correction. Instructor, stop labeling what you've never tested against. Nanite repair squads confirmed her physiology routes kinetic shock through spinal lattice X12. Nobody made her a ghost. Her world made her a stabilizer. The core sphere pulsed again, 2 colors braiding too bright under unstable feedback tokens. A Krolaxian monitor clicked claws on the floor impatiently. Ward is destabilizing the core. This isn't even our drill day. Kaia finally stood, not because someone demanded. Her body simply knew the timers were approaching a threshold. Physics reorganized matters. She stepped into the pit. The vortex gate sealed behind her with thick hydraulic thumps. Every species' retina caught the ripple. The pit's shields engaged and gravity wasn't rising now, it was rewriting its coefficients into something that recognized her center mass signature instead of boot clamps. Inside the pit, the sphere glared too bright for a moment, then dimmed just slightly, like metal reluctant to confess calibration error. Kaia did not touch it. She just sat cross-legged on the secondary core dais, the smaller circle already rated for anomaly testing at 1G baseline. Monitors protested across the room, but Commander Rook locked the shield. We observe now. If she bows or breaks, we intervene. Until then, the sphere is allowed one misunderstanding. The technicians linked field cameras to the pit console. Glyph math spilled across view screens. Every display sang numbers more elegantly than mouths ever could. The sphere was expanding her field signature into the graph containment web, quietly asking not domination but handshake protocols interview for how she balances impedance like timer regulators. Medic Valthera approached the pit railing, gaze on the sphere's tremor pulse frequency. She whispered into Kaia's mic channel. Ward, if the core spikes again, leave. Kaia's voice returned, shadow cold. If it spikes, I absorb blowback, not flee from the handshake. Numbers tremored upward like hearts speaking second-hand silence pressing waves as floor plating readjusted implicitly but not promised assigned future tasks by communication or extra repetition. Same thing again. Rulon Threx blinked at the overlay. So she sits at 7.2G as if the coefficients are missing her protocol check-ins? They aren't missing it, Belther said. The coefficients are bending inward toward her body's absorption lattice, searching for handshake protocol not aligning boots with. Antagonistic cruelty had left, ancient misunderstanding remained only. Dravos finally stepped forward, not threatening, not sneering. Curiosity makes predators human if regret cracks their math overlays quietly enough. So Cadet, he said, if we dial external cohort for mixed physiology again, does the core collapse? Kaia nodded. A single, measured, data-driven nod. If you dial a cohort to shame instead of test, yes. If you dial it to test, no. Physics makes fewer mistakes than instructors showing off their claws. Medical field monitors logged every second of her breathing, posture, and measured word count pacing evaluation. The core hummed once, soft and measured now. Rulon whispered, almost awed, absorption lattice axis symmetrical. That's what the overlay is calling her posture. Because it isn't describing arrogance, Belther said. It's describing compliance. A sphere that once misjudged your species can still detect who sits quietly stable inside platform cracks and core debates, not chaos. AMDIE Institute infamous gravity core lattice conclusion. Kaia stood and left when her timers declared the chamber stable enough to stop describing her. She ascended the spiral ramp without swagger, medals, or sound. Behind her, the gravity sphere updated again, not volatile now. Just obedient. Rulon Threx called after her softly. So Ward. Final question, did you pass or did the sphere learn you? Kaia didn't smile. Dramatic reversals are wasted on a species with calibrated reality. She offered a single sentence as she turned the corner, voice at easy volume, not performance. I passed nothing. The room finally tested something real.